So this is extremely human of us. This is just trying to kind of pick on our natural human tendencies that is just the way that we're kind of wired, right? And so I like to use this example, and I've used this example here before. And it's a tendency to show that we in general just generally care for ourselves, okay? So this is called the Gini test. And so imagine that if you went to bed tonight and a genie woke you up in the middle of the night and said, tomorrow, at some point during the day, you're going to lose the tip of your pinky finger in an accident. There's nothing you could do to stop it. It's just going to happen, okay? And then you have to go back to sleep. And just imagine the anxiety that you feel going through the day, knowing that at some point, something's going to happen where you lose the tip of your pinky finger, right? You're going to feel pretty anxious about that, right, all throughout the day. Now imagine that same scenario. You go to bed, and a genie wakes you up in the middle of the night and says that tomorrow, at some point during the day, you're going to hear news about how 20,000 people on the other side of the planet are going to die from a typhoon. You're going to also feel anxiety about that, the fact that that is going to happen. But the anxiety that you feel about losing the tip of your pinky finger and this typhoon is generally going to be about the same. Your natural body's reaction is about the same. And objectively, you know that the tip of your pinky finger is nowhere near the worth and the lives of 20,000 people. But it shows us that our bodies, just our human selves, our natural tendency is to think about and preserving ourselves first. And so we have this natural tendency to think, well, what about me? What about me? We think about ourselves and we think about what is fair. Think about the parable of the laborers in the field. That if you remember this parable, that a wealthy landowner goes out and he goes to the market square to hire workers for his field. And he finds workers in the field early in the morning, and they agree that they will work in his field for the day at 1 denarius, which is the typical day's wage. So they make this deal. And then they go out and work in the field. And then the wealthy landowner realizes that he needs more workers, so he goes back to the same market and finds other workers standing around. Now it's about 9, 10 o'clock in the morning, and he agrees to hire them. And he does this all throughout the day, going again, hiring people at around noon, and then again hiring people at around 2 o'clock in the day. And as the day is ending, right, as the sun is going down, he lines them up to pay them, starting with the people that he hired the latest, so the people that he hired around the end of the day, giving them 1 denarius, 1 day's wage. And he goes up the line. Of course, the people that were hired in the earliest part of the morning think, well, I've been working here longer, I'm going to get paid more. So they're getting excited, yet they're getting paid the exact same amount. And they start grumbling, saying to themselves like, well, we've worked longer, certainly we deserve to get paid more. And the wealthy landowner says, well, friend, didn't we agree to this wage? And am I not allowed to use my money as I please? Right? It's to show us that when we think in terms of what is fair, that God is not thinking in those terms. The people who work the longest are naturally going to think and expect more, simply because they see the people that were hired later in the day, that they are getting paid, that they should get paid more. Yet God gives the same pay. We have this natural tendency to think about ourselves first. What do we deserve? What do I deserve? What do I think I have earned? What is rightfully mine? This becomes a way for us to think that we have somehow earned more mercy, more grace, more blessings because we have worked harder. We have served in this church longer. We have served on more committees. We've gone to more worship services than that person. We have brought more food. We have volunteered more. Whatever it is, we think that we have earned more. That is just how we are wired as humans. That is our human nature. We expect more because we have worked harder or we have followed God longer. We have kept our noses clean. We have done the right things. We have come to more worship services. We have spent more time serving the church. So therefore, we naturally think that we deserve more. We deserve more of this. We deserve more from God. And what this ends up doing is that when we do encounter the lost, those who have abused substances, those who are unhoused, those who come from dysfunctional families, what happens is our initial reaction is to judge. We judge because we want to see if they fit in with us, that maybe their choices that they have made in their lives are going to spill over onto us and into this church and disrupt the way that we want this church to be. Our initial step is judgment because we have wrongfully determined that God is for those in this church first and foremost. That we deserve everything from God. We deserve everything because we have participated here longer. And so we think that we are able to make the choices about who is in and who is out. Does that person fit in with us or not? Those who are more likely to fit in with us, who have similar backgrounds, who have similar life experiences, who have the same family values, who come from similar socioeconomic conditions and spaces, are much more likely to be invited into our church spaces. That is because we subconsciously believe that because we have been a part of something longer, that we're able to dictate who is in and who is out. And that we simply deserve to be able to make those decisions. Yet God, in the parable that we're going to read, displays the exact opposite of that thinking and encourages us to see the same way. And so over the last 3 Sundays, we've been going over the same parable. Okay, for a preacher to use the same text 3 weeks in a row kind of makes it challenging, but it also makes it to where you are able to dive deeper. And the title of our sermon series is Digging Deep. And the reason is that my hope is at the end of this, you're able to know this parable much more deeply than you did before. And so as we come back to the parable of the prodigal son, we're going to focus in our last Sunday on the Father, for his treatment of his sons, and knowing that that is the goal, for us to be like the Father, that we strive to be like the Father. And so with that said, as I invite you to follow along for our text for today, it comes from Luke chapter 15, verses 11 through 32. The words will be on the screen, and it's also in your bulletins as well. And it says this: Then Jesus said, "There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, 'Father, give me the share of the wealth that will belong to me.' So he divided his assets between them. A few days later, the younger son gathered all he had and traveled to a distant region, and there he squandered his wealth in dissolute living. When he had spent everything, a severe famine took place throughout that region, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that region, who sent him to his fields to feed the pigs. He would gladly have filled his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to his senses, he said, 'How many of my father's hired hands have bread enough and to spare? But here I am dying of hunger. I will get up and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of your hired hands.' So he set off and went to his father. But while he was still far off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. He ran and put his arms around him and kissed him. Then the son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his slaves, 'Quickly bring out a robe, the best one, and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet, and get the fatted calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' And they began to celebrate. Now his elder son was in the field, and as he came and approached the house, he heard music and dancing. He called one of the slaves and asked what was going on. He replied, 'Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fatted calf because he has got him back safe and sound.' Then he became angry and refused to go in. His father came out and began to plead with him. But he answered his father, 'Listen, for all these years I have been working like a slave for you, and I have never disobeyed your command. Yet you have never given me even a young goat so that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came back, who devoured your assets with prostitutes, you killed the fatted calf for him.' Then the father said to him, 'Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. But we had to celebrate and rejoice because this brother of yours was dead and has come to life. He was lost and has been found. The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. It's not a leap, jump, and bound to say that the Father clearly represents God in this parable, and how God responds to someone who is lost that has now been found. And remember, both brothers are lost. They're just lost in different ways. The younger has been lost through a life of dissolute living, and the elder is lost because he is judgmental. He is concerned with what is fair instead of being concerned with grace and mercy, and is concerned only about himself. And like I've said in the previous sermons, the eldest brother represents the Pharisees, that their tendency to judge, to emphasize who is in and who is out. That those who are out are sinners, and that those who are in are the religious, the law followers, the people that they have determined are in. But the thing is, the Father reacts to both and responds to both with grace. First, when the youngest comes home, a man of his position, the Father runs out to greet the youngest son. He does something that a person in his position is not supposed to do. A distinguished man in his position does not run, let alone run to someone who has disowned him, let alone someone who has wished that he is dead, let alone someone who has taken his hard-earned money and spent it. He runs to a son that has disowned him and wished him dead and left him. But not only that, he runs to the same son and honors him. He immediately restores this son back to sonship. That son doesn't even think he deserves to be called his father's son anymore. He's just hoping that he could be a hired hand again. But the father restores him immediately. The son doesn't have to grovel or earn his way back into the eyes of the father. The father just simply makes him his son because that is the only way that the father sees him. And next, when the father goes out to see and talk to the eldest brother, he reminds the son of his relationship to his brother. Last week, I mentioned how the son, the eldest son, says, "This son of yours," doesn't say, "My brother has returned, my brother," right? He says, "This son of yours," because the eldest son has disowned his own brother too. Yet the father responds to the eldest brother by saying, "This brother of yours has returned," reminding the eldest brother of his relationship to his younger brother. He is working with the eldest son to see through a lens of grace, to see through a lens of mercy, not of judgment. Because he wants the eldest son to see through the world through a lens of grace, to see that grace is abundant and that God's mercy overflows, that when his brother who was lost has come home, that he wants him to also run out to meet his long-lost brother, to greet him, because this brother of his was dead and has come to life, was lost and has been found. The father also works with the eldest brother's stubborn heart, and the father works with grace and patience too. The father reminds the eldest that all he has is already his. There's nothing more that he could possibly earn because everything the father has is already his. His inheritance is already there. He already has everything. And so our last step in looking at this parable is to see that the father is trying to get the eldest son to see through a lens of grace. That if the eldest son could see the youngest son like the father did, he would run out to meet his brother too. That is what God is trying to work within us. Like I said last, we are mostly probably like the elder son. That eventually the Father wants us to become like people who run towards those who are lost and are now found, who celebrate with them because they were dead and are now alive. This is so hard for people that are like the eldest brother to do because we are so caught up in being concerned with what is fair, with not understanding how the younger son could also wish that the father was dead and live in such depravity. We don't understand that. We are blinded by being concerned with what is fair, with judgment. We are concerned with seeing those who are unrighteous and to say that they need to earn their way back. Grace isn't fair. Grace isn't fair. because it is the same for all sinners. We cannot earn any more of God's grace. We can only be given the same amount. The Father's love is deep enough for all people and reaches far enough towards the most lost in this world. We cannot change that because God simply is who God is. All we can do is strive to be like the Father, to lead with grace instead of judgment, to lead with compassion and mercy instead of seeking what we think is fair for us. That the addict who finds God through an Al-Anon group is just as worthy as we are of receiving God's grace. That we welcome the sinners and eat with them, as the Pharisees mentioned at the beginning of chapter 5. This is what prompted Jesus to speak in this parable, that they were grumbling that Jesus was eating with sinners. And that we too one day find ourselves in the company of sinners. And maybe one day, we will find that we are running towards the lost just as the Father did. Running towards them because we know that there's nothing better than when someone who is lost is found again. Of seeing our siblings come home. The parable of the prodigal son is not only about two lost sons. It is about a God who runs out to meet anyone who is lost and wants us to run to. This is the story of someone I know. His name is Eddie. And Eddie's story began, he grew up in church, but in the church that he grew up in, he was never really exposed too much to the idea of helping those in need. It was brought up every once in a while. Every once in a while they would ask people to serve in a food pantry or a food kitchen at another church. But it wasn't a major component of how the church operated. But he still found that he was drawn to helping the homeless, the unhoused. Now, after college, he graduated, and one of the first jobs he had was kind of a low-paying job working at an after-school program. And it was with middle school children. It was only part-time. But he had to drive all the way to Long Beach, which was a very different city than where he grew up. And in this program, the kids there were mostly underprivileged. It was free after-school care for them. And in Long Beach, there are unhoused people everywhere. This was something new for him. Where he grew up, there were hardly any unhoused people. And so Eddie decided that once a week, after his job, when he was in Long Beach, he would do a very simple thing. He didn't know the risks of giving money to those who are unhoused, but he felt compelled to find one person every week to bless. Instead of just giving it to them like while passing by and driving by while they're on a street corner or something like that, he was actually going to stop, park, and go and talk to them and give it to them. And he would give them 1 hour of wages. And so Eddie did this once a week. He would park his car and go to them on the street, whether it was a busy street corner or in that middle divider where there's that piece of cement, right, when you're making a left-hand turn, where they were begging for money. And he realized that in the act of going to them and giving them a 1 hour worth of his wages was just $10 at the time. He started to see from their perspective just a little bit. He was able to catch a glimpse into their life. He saw that hundreds of cars would drive by very quickly, and that it was actually really scary standing on that center divider, knowing that these cars are going by so quickly. And it was actually quite humiliating for him to even go out onto those center dividers because it was so public. He felt like it was such a public place to be that hundreds of people were passing him by. And it was just so visible. He didn't like being so visible to all these people. But he still felt compelled to continue to do this work. And so he began asking on these street corners if he could pray for them. He didn't think that anyone would actually take this seriously. And so whether it was on a busy street corner or a busy middle divider, they all said yes. They all said, yes, please pray for me. Not a single person ever said no. And in their own way, despite whatever circumstances they were going through, they all had some sort of connection to God. And so because of those experiences, he felt strongly that addressing the unhoused would be a part of his future work. Today, he works in nonprofits that seek to integrate advocacy for the unhoused as part of their work. And through his work, he learned that where the city that he grew up in, that city would forcibly remove the unhoused populations and dump them in places like Skid Row and places like Long Beach. His eyes were opened to the realities of people that were living on the streets and how wealthy cities treated their unhoused populations, how they would simply dump them onto other cities, making it that other city's problem. His story reminds me of two things. One, that God runs to those who might be lost and meets them wherever they are, whether it's on the street corner or wherever they are, in situations that we might not be able to imagine. And two, that Eddie realized that he had some perspective that he needed to see the world in a different way, that in many ways he was like the elder brother, where he needed to have his eyes opened to the realities that these people faced, and God allowed his eyes to be open. Amen. Amen. At this time, as we go into our prayer hymn,